Welcome guys, welcome back to another video of Minko's Corner. Again, second video of the day. Hope you enjoy this. Today what we're going to do is we're going to watch a video on the Conquest of India, a historical paradox by Extra Credits, sorry. It's a very interesting channel. I know a lot about the channel. I watched a few of their videos on my off time, and their content is very very good. And I don't know anything about the conquest of India, only that it was conquered primarily by the East India Company of Britain, and eventually the company was annexed by the government, and the government took control of India. But I don't know anything about the English conquest of India, so let's learn about it.
India, Coronation Park, New Year's Day, 1903. It's the largest and most expensive coronation ceremony in modern history. The Delhi Durbar, the Mughal Empire's assembly, is reconvening to proclaim the ascension of a new emperor. Planning this took a full year. The ceremony's attended by nearly 200,000 people and kicks off 2 weeks of additional rituals and celebrations. And to accommodate the festivities, a humongous temporary tent city has been set up outside Delhi. It features electricity, telephone lines, sanitation, a hospital, a rail line, a courthouse, a
1903.
police force, an art museum, a military parade ground, stores, dance halls, bandstands, polo grounds, and
Whoa.
a post office that only uses commemorative Durbar stamps. Oh geez, I hope they didn't forget anything. As for the new emperor of India, he will be delivered to the ceremony on a golden howdah, atop an elephant with candelabras attached to its tusks.
Is the Emperor George VII?
So safe to say, everyone who was anyone in the empire
Or
will
Edward
be at
VIII.
this event,
No, George
except
VII.
the emperor himself. Thanks so much to Curiosity
Yeah.
Stream for helping us share today's historical tale. Who did this new emperor think he was? I mean, what kind of person would duck out of a huge coronation, not to mention leave their extravagant MMO mount hanging? What if I told you the new emperor wasn't from the subcontinent at all?
Yeah.
Heck, not even from Asia, but instead from a rainy island over 4,000 miles away. And what if I told you he was also not a great warrior, but instead a lazy playboy who chain-smoked his way to an early grave? Doesn't make sense, does it? Well, consider this your first lesson in the complicated, tragic, and paradoxical history of the British conquest of India. Now, this is an incredibly popular topic, but what really makes it interesting is the fact that it's popular not only with average people, but also professional historians. See, usually the professionals in this field thumb their noses at popular historical topics because they've been written about to death, so there's not much room for original research or writing. But with the conquest of India, things are different. Here's a topic
so?
that's so complicated and nuanced that it's impossible to develop an authoritative text about. Not to mention this event has something that all historians love: a historical paradox, an absurd or contradictory event that defies expectations. Now, an armchair historian might say,
Well, how can we have a historical paradox when we already know how history unfolded, eh? Case closed, sir.
au contraire, armchair, because historians spend a good deal of their time thinking about contingency in the past. Or to put it another way, how things might have gone differently. Because thinking about contingency helps historians understand causality. What were the truly important people, events, and things that led us to where we are now? But with a historical paradox, you have an outcome that doesn't match the events leading up to that point. Kinda like with an upset in sports. Okay, for a completely random and in no way pointed example, let's say your soccer team is up 3-0 going into the second half of the Champions League final in Istanbul. You'd expect to win, right? You'd be so confident, in fact, that you would be left in utter disbelief if, in the end, your team lost. That's the kind of
Is that real? That Liverpool just really beat Milan, like 4-3, I guess. I didn't know
feeling
that.
a historical paradox leaves you with. Sorry, Milan. And historical paradoxes draw people in, including professors, precisely because of their unfathomable nature. And with the conquest of India, we have brilliant historians who have dedicated their lives to understanding this one event and who often end up with incomplete answers. Nothing ever seems settled with the history of the conquest, and that helps to drive more interest and more interpretations. Given all this, we're not even going to pretend to offer you a definitive version of the conquest of India. What we will do, though, is give you an introduction to the complex, decades-long process that affected billions of lives across multiple continents and 3 centuries, in hopes it inspires you to do more paradoxical digging of your own. So, let's start by talking about the historical paradox at the heart of the conquest, the idea that drives public interest and leads historians to dedicate their lives to this topic. How did the entire subcontinent of India become beholden to the rule of Britain, a comparatively tiny island off the coast of Europe, for nearly 2 centuries? How did a land of hundreds of millions of people come to be controlled by a preposterously small
At the time when England conquered India, wasn't like England like the whole of Great Britain, like Ireland and Scotland and all that was under British rule? I don't know why he just highlights the English.
number of British administrators, at a ratio of 1 colonial officer for every 250,000 Indians?
Jesus
And how
Christ.
did a technologically advanced, culturally influential, and militarily successful society end up throwing the party of the century for an idle foreign emperor who didn't even bother to show up?
How is this a paradox? Britain's conquest of India was inevitable. They had more money, better technology, more know-how, and nastier diseases.
Oh, I totally hear you, Army. That certainly is a common explanation for the conquest of India, and it's one you often see applied, rightly or wrongly, to histories of other European empires. But here, that explanation simply runs against the evidence.
Oh, no,
Because
yeah.
when regular contact between Britain and India began at the start of the 17th century, their roles were very much reversed. India was the technologically advanced, wealthy, cosmopolitan empire with diseases known for killing Europeans, while Britain was the provincial, insignificant, comparatively impoverished backwater. Plus, in 1600, the English Empire only included Wales and parts of Ireland. In fact, the English state barely survived the 16th century, and quite possibly would have been destroyed by the Spanish Armada, if not for a fortuitous storm. Not only were the English dwarfed at this time by imperial powers like Spain and France, but they'd often had trouble competing against even small European states like Portugal and the Dutch Republic. By the time the fabled East India Company established its first trading post in India in 1618, the Portuguese had been there for over a century, while the Dutch had established an impressive trade network based out of Indonesia. So when it came to empire building in the early modern era, the English were very much an also-ran of imperial powers. In contrast, India was ruled at the time by the Mughal Empire, led by the descendants of the great Mongol empires of the Middle Ages. Beginning with Emperor Babur in
I
1525,
didn't know
they
that.
established a near-complete rule over the subcontinent by 1600. While the English were trying to keep the colonists from starving in Jamestown and going through a civil war at home, the Mughal Empire determined the lives of 180 million people, or roughly 20% of the world's population at the time.
Okay,
They made
now I understand why people dedicate their lives to understand how this happened. Because how could you lose 180 million people lost to a small island in Europe?
maintained huge armies made up of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, with anything equivalent not being seen in Europe until the 19th century. Their
What?
soldiers were armed with the latest flintlock muskets, muzzle-loading cannons, and possessed some of the best cavalry in the world. Plus, and I cannot stress this enough, they had totally awesome armored elephants. The Mughals also made use of a
Carthage.
sophisticated administrative structure that drew power and wealth from land revenues. And through this structure, even petty nobles enjoyed a lifestyle many more times luxurious than the English monarch. And this is especially impressive when you realize that the Mughal emperors managed this system despite the fact that their kingdom was made up of an incredibly diverse collection of ethnicities, languages, and competing religious beliefs. By contrast, if you want to know how the European monarchs of the time dealt with religious differences, well, our 30 Years' War series can fill
Yeah.
you in on that. So not only were the Mughals more successful than the Europeans, but their demographics meant they were playing on hard mode as well. True, the Mughals never tried to expand their empire overseas, but why leave home when you've already got all the good stuff? I mean, what drew Europeans to India in the first place wasn't a desire for conquest or to project strength, but rather a desperation for Indian commodities like pearls, gems, spices, silks, and manufactured cloth. The early European trading posts in India weren't signs of Mughal weakness, but signals of strength. "We don't come to you," the Mughals basically declared. "You come to us." European traders humbly petitioned Mughal emperors for permission to open fledgling trading ports along the coastline. But even successful European merchants had trouble finding any goods that Indians were willing to trade for, apart from gold and silver from the New World. And of all of these pitiful European traders begging the Mughals for access to their markets, the English at the time were unquestionably the most pathetic of the bunch. Far from being inevitable, from the perspective of the 17th century, the British conquest of India was more like outlandish speculative fiction, like Planet of the Apes outlandish. And yet, it happened. But as you'll find out next week, the how and the why of that process is just as perplexing as the premise.
Well, I hope you learned as much as I. This was an insane video. The premise of it all, that if what he's saying is true, and I don't think he's lying, but I'm not saying he's just, I've never really heard it in those terms, that the Mughal Empire had 180 million civilians, more wealth, a better army than the English. How the hell did they lose? I mean, it's like Rome losing to, I don't know, Corsica, because for some reason it's pretty preposterous when you think about it. That India, and at the time it wasn't a divided India, Pakistan, no, it was the whole continent of India against England, and England somehow came on top. How the hell did that happen? That's very interesting. I'm gonna. This series is a new series, so we're gonna have to wait episode by episode. I hope you enjoy this, but it is pretty insane when you think about it. I'm speechless. I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but I'm pretty speechless because I mean it was, the crown jewel of the British Empire was India. That was it. That was the most important part of their empire because it was the richest and the most populous. But it's, I don't know. This is a very very interesting part of history, and we're gonna delve into it way more with this series. And I hope you enjoy this. I hope you stay with me. Give a like, give a subscribe. I appreciate it a lot. I'll see you guys next time. See ya.